Hi everyone. Just a quick warning. This episode contains a brief discussion of scenes depicting sexual violence. Feel free to skip this one if you need to. Welcome to Screens of the Stone Age, the podcast where scientists review movies about prehistoric people. My name is Josh Lindell. I'm a PhD student studying Neanderthal teeth, and I'm here with my co-hosts.
I'm Kim Plomp. I study bioarchaeology, so human skeletons in the archaeological record.
I'm Ross Barnett. I have a background in ancient DNA and Pleistocene animals.
And we have a special guest today. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Mirjana Roksandic. I'm professor of human evolution at University of Winnipeg.
Welcome.
Thank you.
You're also the president of the Palaeoanthropological Society, which supports this podcast.
Yes.
And today we're reviewing the movie Clan of the Cave Bear from 1986, based on the book Clan of the Cave Bear from 1980 by Jean Auel. I had to look up how to pronounce this name. It's Auel, right? Like owl?
That's how I say it.
Okay. Normally we start off by giving a summary of the film that we're reviewing. Mirjana, as our guest, would you like to summarize this film?
Oh, that's a tough one, because first I was kind of expecting, some kind of a movie about Neanderthals, but this is actually a movie about a misfit, right? Someone from a different group joining one group and not actually being accepted by every member of the group, and then eventually she has to leave the group. So it's kind of not necessarily about Neanderthals, but more about how we perceive human groups, right?
It's a pretty consistent theme in all the movies that we've been watching so far. It's never actually about the ancient people. It's always about the way people treat each other today.
Yeah. Have you read the book, Mirjana?
Long time ago, yeah. I started actually, and I don't think I ever finished it properly, but I read it. What I was finding about the book, if that's okay to comment on right now, is that there were too many explanations. She went into all the science, like she really wanted to give the science background to it, and so it was kind of really weird,
I read it, I think, in my undergrad, and I read a couple of because there's 5 books in the series, I think, 5 or 6.
At least.
I made it to the middle of the 3rd, and then something, when life just gets in the way, and then you put a book down, and then you just never get back to it. And then now it's to the point that I have to go, if I'm going to get back to it, I have to start at the beginning again. So it's on my list to do it again, but I really enjoyed the books back then.
Yeah, I think I read it same, like just after undergraduate, I think. And they're one of those books that you always find in secondhand bookshops. There's always at least one copy of some of them. And I can't remember if I read the first one. I definitely read like the second and third ones, and then similarly kind of gave up. But they're very much kind of airport books.
You would have to read the first one if you read the second and third.
I don't know. I mean, I can't remember if I did or not. I don't think I did. I think the first one's the hardest to find in the bookshops, whereas there's always like second and thirds and fourth and fifth.
Yeah.
But remind me, is the series like only the Clan of the Cave Bear is one of the books in the series?
Yes.
Yeah,
right? It's not one. Like the whole series, right?
And I think the whole series is called Earth's Children.
Yeah.
And there's the Mammoth Hunters and the Plains of Passage and a few other ones as well.
There was a horse
and
one,
so the
too.
Clan of the Cave Bear would be the first, no?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen the movie before, which I was surprised at. Yeah.
I'd only started reading the book when I was a kid, and I'm pretty sure I never finished it. But am I correct in my understanding that the movie is kind of stretched across multiple books, and it's not just based on the first book? Is that right?
No, I think that was just the first book.
Yeah, I think it's just I don't recognize anything from the ones that I'd read.
Yeah, because I think the second book is when she leaves the clan and she's on her own.
Yeah.
I don't think she meets others until the 3rd book.
Okay. I think the second one is where she invents domestication, isn't it? Or she
yes.
Oh my goodness.
She tames a cave lion
she starts to ride the
domesticates a horse.
Oh, that's pretty good.
So I loved the second one because I loved the cave lion.
I think that's probably also why I started with the second one.
Yeah.
Okay, so going back to the summary of the movie, just to clarify, the movie is about a modern human woman. She starts off as a young girl and grows into a woman who's separated from her modern human group by an earthquake and is adopted by a group of Neanderthals and raised by them. And as Mirjana said, it's all about a modern human not fitting into the Neanderthal society. As usual, I like to start off by nitpicking all little mistakes in the movies we're watching. I was kind of surprised that there weren't as many as I was expecting. Not as many details that are like just glaringly bad.
Mm-hmm.
Except that the modern human is presented as a blonde.
That's the main thing I've got written down. When did blonde hair and blue eyes evolve? Not until like 10,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, possibly Neanderthals, but not in modern humans, right? So
yeah, so the modern human should have had darker skin and darker hair, and if anything, the Neanderthals should have been the fairer people.
Mm-hmm.
Ross, what can you tell me about all the animals?
Well, so I'm going to say first of all that I didn't really like this film compared to the other ones. I found it pretty boring, and yeah, it was interesting to lots of the other films we had where it's always been about how the Neanderthal fits into human society, and this was quite a neat kind of reverse of that, where you have how does the modern human fit into Neanderthal society. So that was interesting, and I think that's where the books does a much better job than the film ever could in filling in all that kind of internal conflict and all the rest of it. But in terms of the animals, I thought they were the best bit. Like I thought that the kind of animal fights were amazing, considering this was done in 1986. Like the lion scenes and the bear scenes particularly were really, really good. And I don't know how they actually managed to stage like somebody fighting a bear without ending up with a stuntman getting his head ripped off or something like that. I was just kind of that those bits really stuck out as being the best parts of the film. But yeah, for animal bits, I liked at the beginning where it had a whole heap of images from Lascaux Cave, which is slightly later than when Neanderthals were around. It's one of the later kind of cave art sites. But you have nice bison, you've got nice spotty horses. So that's all real stuff to start with. The cave lion that they had was great because they didn't use a male with a massive mane. They used either a kind of subadult male with very little mane or a female, and that's what we think kind of cave lions looked like. They didn't have the mane, so that was really great too. The only slight issue, and I've got to forgive them for this, is that they used a brown bear instead of a cave bear in the living animal shots, and obviously cave bears are extinct, so you've got to give them a bit of leeway there. But when they were showing the skull that they dug out of their new cave as a kind of good sign, that was an actual cave bear skull. That was quite obvious from the massive kind of dome on the forehead. So they at least went to the trouble to get the right bear skull when it was important, and did what they could with the bears that are alive today in terms of stunt performances. And there's also the scene with the wolves was pretty cool too, where the wolves attack the little boy and have to be scared off by Ayla with her slingshot, which was cool. The only kind of animal issue I thought, and I only briefly saw it, and I'm not sure if I'm right on this, but I thought at some point there appeared to be a chipmunk, a small kind of rodent that I thought was a chipmunk, but it could have been something else. And obviously chipmunks are native to North America, so you wouldn't have had them overlapping with Neanderthals and modern humans in a kind of vague Western Eurasian context, which is where this is supposed to be set, I'm guessing.
I didn't see
but
the
in terms of animals, that's pretty much it. Oh, one other thing, when they're all getting boozed up at the kind of Neanderthal party, they seem to be drinking some kind of alcohol or some other kind of intoxicant out of a giant clam shell, which they've got there. But giant clams, I think, are only found in the Pacific, so they also wouldn't have been found in Western Eurasia. But apart from that, yeah, they've kind of done a pretty good job, I think. And I'm sure that's partly down to Jean Auel's writing, which was really well researched for the time and followed a lot of the kind of up-to-date research that had been published. So yeah, her books for the time were really kind of cutting edge in terms of kind of speculative paleofiction, and which is basically the genre that she more or less invented. If you exclude quite a few other well, she definitely popularized it, put it that way, that these books were kind of bestsellers at the time.
Yeah, definitely. She has a background in paleoanthropology, doesn't she?
No, I didn't know that. But yeah, she definitely was well researched. And sometimes it was like these explanations that came with the book, probably because I was probably already grown up when I read that, as opposed to the three of you. So her explanations were like, okay, I want literature. Give me a break with all this, sort of narrative, explanatory, so sort of like, okay. I found that in lots of books, a big problem in lots of books on science fiction or this prehistoric fiction, that in order to situate you, they have to give a lot of background information, and it's not always done in a way that's like artsy or literary. It's, more like a lecture kind of thing.
Right, yeah. I would have read it just as I was starting to take my anthropology courses, so I probably loved it.
Enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Counts as homework.
I just Googled her, and she doesn't have a background in paleoanthropology, but for the book and her other books, she learned things. So she went on a survival class to learn how to construct an ice cave and make fires and tan leather and napping. And so she really went all in to learn things for a book.
It's actually a good idea, She was sweet. I mean,
yeah. And in terms of what you were saying, Rosa, with the chipmunk and stuff, is that it's, I recognize the trees, those giant red oak trees. And I was that looks like my neighborhood.
Yeah.
And I Googled it. And so it is, it was filmed in British Columbia, where I'm from, and in the Okanagan, where I grew up. So the squirrel may not have been casted. It could have been a walk-on.
It just happened.
Yeah, or the chipmunk. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing how many Neanderthals you find in the Pacific Northwest on film.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Well, that's where William was from, right?
Yeah.
But the idea of mimicking Alaska is coming from the research in the 80s, where actually the French school, what's his name now? Blanking. Depiction and the other guy who was excavating La Quina, they also thought that Alaska was actually pretty good equivalent to what France looked like in Pleistocene. So it's kind of trying to mimic France, right? In the Pleistocene.
The whole concept of the clan of the cave bear is also based on older research than that too, right? On the cave bear cults.
Yeah. Also, something that was quite prominent in France, right?
There's a couple of details that I thought were really, I'm trying not to say accurate, but they're the two details that were very intentionally put in where at 2 points when she's being banished from the tribe, they put this bear tibia through the zygomatic arch of the bear skull. And that's because part of this Neanderthal bear worship cult that they were speculating about in like the 1920s and 30s, one of the things they found was exactly that, a bear skull with a bear tibia placed through it. And they were interpreting that couldn't have happened accidentally and that somebody must have done that for some reason. And so they've taken that actual finding and interpreted it into the film and attributed like an actual meaning to it, which I thought was an interesting detail to include.
Yeah, that is. I didn't know that. It was really interesting. I appreciated how they had, they showed the intentional burial. So intentional burial is still an argued thing with the Neanderthals, whether some of the burials that we find remains, whether they were buried or not. And Mirjana would know this better than I would, but some of I think at least one of the potential graves has numerous species of pollen in and among their remains. And so when they were laying down those plants, the pollinating plants in the grave, I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, that's based on Shanidar, right?
Yes, Shanidar, yeah. And the argument that it wasn't intentional burial is that the wind would have blown in that pollen. It would have been in the environment anyways. But I thought they had definitely done their research to look into
Yeah.
how Neanderthals would have buried if they had actually intentionally buried their dead.
So you mentioned Shanidar there, and definitely that's one of the sites that gave a lot of kind of resources for I think Jean Auel's writing. So Kreb, the Mog-Ur of the clan, he's clearly based on Shanidar 1 because he's got this massive kind of left eye trauma that's left him blind, and he's kind of a bit lame, and you never see his right arm. And Shanidar 1, which is from a really well preserved Neanderthal from that site, as you guys know. But for the listeners, it's the skull shows evidence of trauma to the left eye socket, which would have left the person blind. He's got a potentially amputated arm and other kind of right side potential paralysis and kind of exostosis of the ear and other kind of infirmities, which suggests that he was not just had a hard life, but also was looked after by other members. So he's kind of evidence for kind of group cohesion and caring for the elderly, caring for people that can't hunt themselves, evidence sort of sociality in Neanderthal groups, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So one of the things that I liked is that Neanderthals are not represented, like the reconstruction of Neanderthals and their looks is really mild. Like, they didn't go overboard with the big brow ridges or anything else, right? I mean, it's kind of hard to make modern humans not have the cheekbones and not have the chin. So I don't blame them for not trying too hard on that. But they didn't overdo it, which is a pleasant change, from the rest of the movies that talk about
definitely compared to some of the other films, they didn't overdo the facial prosthetics. But what I found quite amusing was the massive 80s hair, which all the Neanderthals had, but none of the moderns, which I think was their attempt to kind of hide the kind of low sweeping classic Neanderthal skull. It's there. It's just under the big hair. You'll have to imagine it.
But not just that, but the 80s hair, like it's hilarious because, like it has this mullet as well. Like it's the fashion of the day was horrific.
When I was watching the movie, there was times that I was like, I almost feel like I know who the authors are, or not the authors, the actors. But I was like, oh, it's such a obscure movie, though. I'm sure it's not anybody famous. And I looked, and it's actually the modern human woman, Isla, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Isla. She's was in Splash, of course.
It's Daryl Hannah.
Daryl Hannah.
Yeah.
You don't need to say it. Daryl Hannah. I mean,
she's just the woman from Splash to me. And then Kreb is that guy that's I knew their names last night, but I can't remember them now. He's that guy that's in everything.
I'll pull up IMDb while you're talking, so it sounds like I know everybody.
He's on like Sex and the City, and he's the dad in Dexter. He's that guy.
Yeah, cultural references there are escaping me.
And then Isla is the mom in Parks and Rec, the Leslie Knope's mom.
Oh, that's where I know her from most recently. So that's Pamela Reed. Kreb is James Remar. Who else was a well-known, well-recognizable character from that movie?
They're the only ones I really knew.
Yeah, I gotta be honest, I don't know most of these actors either, but I recognize their names, but I haven't really seen them in anything recently.
But it was just almost just like an inkling of recognition, but I couldn't place them. So it was interesting that even with that much makeup on and everything, especially with Kreb.
But I think he's probably the strongest character there, like in terms of how well he was reconstructed, how he's based on these Neanderthals from Shanidar, and so that's pretty good, yeah.
What did everybody think about their language?
Well, that was interesting because in the book, most of their communication is done from telepathy, and the reason why they're able to have the telepathy is because of the part of their brain that's developed because in their occipital bun area that modern humans don't have. So that's how she explained it in the book, which I thought was I loved back then. And so I was wondering how they were going to do it. without having someone actually to say it out loud and explain that. So I think they actually did a pretty good job in just having it be very basic hand language, and then also bringing up multiple times about the spirits and the memories, and that, so you get this idea that they're basing a lot of things on this wealth of information that they're born with that humans don't have access to. So I think they did it fairly well without having to explicitly explain what she was trying to get at with the differences.
They do explicitly have like magic and telepathy in the movie, especially at the end when Kreb, I think it was Kreb, calls to her telepathically during the hallucinogenic scene. And then they share a vision of the bear and the lion, and then he sends her this message where the lion walks alone, and then she learns that she has to walk alone. I suppose that if you want to interpret the movie as, just straight realistic, you could just interpret that as being hallucinogenic, but I think the movie's explicitly saying that there is real magic and there is real telepathy in this movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that would be a hard thing to get through with a movie when you don't have some people talking and explaining things. In the book, she can write it, this, knowledge or whatever, but how do you translate that onto...
Yeah, definitely. But they also have, like, all the way through a voiceover which sort of explains, it's never it's not Ayla's voice. I'm not sure whose voice it's supposed to be. Maybe an older Ayla, though it's never explicitly said, who does a lot of exposition as well for the stuff that's kind of more difficult to...
Which I think is a good... It worked well with the movie in general, right?
Especially when there is so much exposition.
Yeah. But not so much with the language, their language is so rudimentary. Their gestures are rudimentary. It's, probably in the 80s, that was the current state of affairs, because that's how they, at the time they were considered not to have been able to talk, right? Or to hear human language, right? Obviously, it's changing now, but that was the state of knowledge at the time. So I think she had relatively good records to it, but it's still a little bit rudimentary for my taste. And so is the sex scene, it's like a doggy sex kind of. I don't know why they're so fascinated with that as the. You have it in Game of Thrones, first season, it's all about doggy sex. That's so weird,
Yeah. It seems to be also how they show in movies in Hollywood the difference between making
consensual
love and rape, or a controlling type of sex.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah, because one of the sex scenes in Clan of the Cave Bear is a rape scene, and then quite often in Game of Thrones it's a rape scene too, and so I think that's when they're trying to give the impression that there's some kind of
coercion.
Yeah, it's not consensual. There's a power dynamic happening, so the woman has to give it, whether it's rape or whether it's coercion or whatever. That was So I think that's what they're getting at with that.
And I think it's also in the book as well. I mean, the books are very kind of explicit and unashamedly so, but I think it's also, or it seemed like it was used here as a way to show, with the language shows that they have complex ideas, although they can't express them linguistically. They can express them with a mixture of linguistics and kind of sign language. So they have complex internal lives that are similar to modern humans, the Neanderthals in the film. But it's the kind of sex scenes are the kind of author's way, I think, of showing how different the Neanderthal society is to humans. And I think it's maybe a slightly cheap way of doing that. I mean, this is, it's not, there's other ways of expressing that, but there was, I think, common for films at the time as well to use that as a shortcut to say, this is how different these societies are. This is how we can look down on them as being different. And, it's problematic, I think, at best.
Yeah. Well, and not to spoil the other books, but I remember I think it's the third book, she meets another lone, handsome, blonde Homo sapien.
John Delar.
Yeah, and they fall in love and they make love laying down missionary or whatever. It's described like a love scene.
But you have that when the two Neanderthals, she's watching them making love, right? So you're right. I mean, they're probably using the doggy sex as a kind of a shortcut to submission and coercion and stuff like that, because these two Neanderthals are actually having fun and being happy, and she's asking if she's ever going to be impregnated that way, right?
Yeah,
and they tell her, "No, you're too ugly," right?
Yeah,
which I liked. Like, the idea that Neanderthals would find modern humans ugly was a plus.
Well, and they would say, that she would never find a mate because she was ugly, and so the focus was on her having a mate. So even after she was raped and after the bully guy kept raping her, that was never seen as mating, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was definitely a disjunction between forced sex and relationships, and the two things were overlapped in some of the Neanderthal couples, but not in Ayla and Brood's interactions.
Brood.
Yeah, so the Neanderthal society is depicted as very male-dominated and misogynistic. But Mirjana, as you said right at the beginning, it's not really a movie about Neanderthals at all. So my understanding is that this is basically a metaphor for gender roles and feminism at the beginning of the 1980s. Because this, the context of this book and then the book was written in 1980 and the movie is 1986. This is right on the heels of the women's rights movement of the 60s and 70s. And the author, before writing the book, was in, I don't know, some sort of business person job where she basically hit a glass ceiling and then got discouraged and left to start writing these books instead. And so my understanding of the message of the story is that Neanderthal society is on the nose metaphor for our own society, which is ruled by Neanderthals, ruled by cavemen. And the message of the story is that she's because she's a modern human, she doesn't fit into Neanderthal society, because in Neanderthal society the women aren't allowed to touch tools. And they just fundamentally can't learn how to hunt because they have this concept of this cultural memory, which is it seems like it's biologically inherited the way they describe it. Mm-hmm. And so women don't have the ability to learn, but then they demonstrate that she does have the ability to learn because, first of all, she can count, which she demonstrates to Kreb, and he tells her to keep it a secret because that wouldn't go over well. And then later she finds a sling and she learns how to throw a rock with a sling, which there was a scene where the other men were practicing and some of them were not very good at it and they got discouraged, and then she went and practiced and learned how to do it. So it's showing that she as a woman, as this new evolution of woman, can learn how to do all the things that men can do and do it better than them. And even so, the male-dominated society doesn't want her to be in that role. And then at the end of the movie, she has the vision, which is that the lion walks alone and she realizes she has to leave behind this Neanderthal society and go find a new modern society, a society of modern people. So I don't know if that's, if that was the intended message. It seemed to me that was a pretty on-the-nose message of the movie.
That's so deep. I did not get that.
It's a great message, and it's really on the nose once you lay it out, but also it doesn't paint Neanderthals well because it's just calling Neanderthals the Neanderthal, the slur Neanderthal, calling them old cavemen who can't evolve and can't learn new ways. So despite the fact that they presented the Neanderthals pretty well, and they had, they painted their faces, they had religion and magic. Yeah, they were depicted pretty well, I thought. And yet the message is that they're old-fashioned and they can't change and modern humans are better. So it's a little conflicting for me, I think.
I wouldn't so much mind if the modern human was a black girl, snubbing their noses and telling them, okay, yay, power to women. But, this trope of a blonde beauty, who's going to show them all, it's just a little bit too much for me. It's just never very fond of those. But I guess that was the times, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting that maybe if they remade it today and with kind of the sort of 40 years of research since it's been filmed, like a more accurate way of doing it would be with a different non-European actress in the place of Ayla. That would actually fit better with the data that we have now in terms of kind of evolution of skin coloration and hair color and stuff like that. Like we were saying before, we know that you don't get blue eyes and blonde hair until probably the Mesolithic in modern humans, and before that there would have been a much bigger diversity of skin phenotypes.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because they did remake it in 2015, so we can review that one.
They did.
They still use a British actress for Ayla, so that part isn't any different.
I didn't know they remade it. How did I miss that?
I think it might have been a made-for-TV movie.
Oh.
A Hallmark special.
Hallmark special. Christmas with Neanderthals. Also Neanderthals are based on the at the time idea of what primitive people did, right? So it's kind of, in some ways, it has a dubious message, as you have mentioned, right? Just because, but I mean, yeah, I don't know.
I definitely put it well below Encino Man, which is still, I think, our top film. I didn't like it. I mean, I just found it kind of quite boring, and maybe I'm the Neanderthal for this, but not a lot happens. You don't really feel a connection to the drama. I mean, I don't really know how. I definitely the books would sell that much better, and I enjoyed the books when I read them more than I enjoyed the film. So I don't really know why.
But it always seems that way with movies that are based on books. I always find that there's a bit of a loss of, like, they're not as strong as movies that are just movies.
Yeah, it's true.
But it's not just that. There's no theater or movie magic in this one. You're right. The drama is lacking. The drama is just so superficial. Like, okay, I guess it's a very deep drama when you're living it, but it's presented in a way that is like, no real plot. I don't know. No movie magic, really.
There's no danger or peril to any of the characters, particularly. Yes, Brood is like a total arsehole, but the worst that's going to happen is what happens anyway, is that she just leaves, and we know that she's totally capable of living on her own. So there's never any danger from that. There's no chance of her being killed or doing anything that's really going to impact her in a massively, like, mortal way. And the film ends with her leaving. It's kind of like it's just my holiday with Neanderthals, essentially. Like, she spends her time kind of growing up with them, and then she goes off somewhere else. And that's there's just not a lot of kind of emotional impact in there, really, apart from the characters, which are interesting, but not that interesting.
Not developed, though.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Ross, I think that most people agree with you, and I don't think this movie was well received when it was released, and in fact it has a 10% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes right now. Ooh. So I don't think most people think it's a great movie, and I had to watch it twice because the first time, halfway through, I got distracted looking at stuff on my phone, and then I was like, oh right, I'm supposed to be reviewing this movie.
I know, I kept doing that too. I kept having to go back and then realizing that there's a lot of dialogue happening that I'm not, because usually you can hear it, right? But you're not listening. I liked the one Iceman with Charlie better, actually.
They're interesting to compare because they were released very close to each other. So they're released at the same sort of point in the history of research of Neanderthals. And there's some similarities in the way they portray them because they both seem to have very rudimentary language, although they're very expressive and talkative. But they also both have very well-established religious worldviews or spiritual worldviews. In Iceman, Charlie worships the bird god, and in this one, obviously, they worship the cave bear. And Charlie is later in the movie, he's trying to get into some sort of trance when he's towards the climax of the movie, he's chanting. And in this one, they have the hallucinogen scene where they're getting into some sort of trance. And then the problematic aspect of that, is particularly in Iceman, is where they're drawing a direct parallel between Charlie's religion and the Inuit religion, which is not as explicit in this one, but I think that they do take a lot of elements. They take a lot of elements of indigenous religion and build that into the Neanderthal religion, which is problematic, especially if my reading that the Neanderthals represent an old-fashioned primitive way of life, it's implying that these indigenous, animistic worldviews are primitive compared to the evolved blonde white girl's worldview.
Yeah, but I don't. I mean, I think it's lack of imagination more than deliberate sort of portrayals of primitive condition, right? Because they don't really know how to imagine something else that is happening in the worldview of these groups, right? But I mean, to present them as not speaking while having such complex religious views is it's a bit of a stretch, right? The other thing is that in all of these movies, I mean, there is the blonde girl or a white girl who's a good character. I wonder where's this coming from? Remember in William, that was the mother. In the Ice Guy, there is this, I don't know about Encino Man, I forgot. But in there is the anthropologist in the Iceman, and there is this blonde girl in this one. So, I mean, what is it that they're having against guys, right? In this,
well, in Iceman, it was a. Which Iceman are we? The one with Charlie. The guy was an anthropologist, or the anthropologist was guy.
No, there's this one, and when they actually thought this Ice Guy.
Yeah, they're one of the scientists.
Not the anthropologist, but the Dr. Brady was some sort of geochemist or something. What was she actually?
Right. Yeah, but she was a villainess, wasn't she?
Oh, okay. No, I missed that.
Kind of.
I think we could probably lay quite a lot of the blame at the feet of Raquel Welch in 1 million years BC. I think that may be where at least some of that comes from.
Right.
It's an enduring image.
We have a whole class of movies that sort of spawn from that one that are on the list, and I've never seen any of them, and I wonder when we finally get to them if we're going to talk for 10 minutes and be like, well, that's all we can really say about this movie, or if maybe we'll have a lot to say about it. But I'm interested to see when we get to 10 million years BC how much we have to say about that movie, actually.
Why would we be 10 million years BC? I mean, what's the connection?
Well, that's going to be 10 minutes of time talking about that.
10 million and 2,000 years ago.
Yeah. Okay, well, yeah, this is, it was a bit underwhelming, I would say, this movie. There's so much potential, even with the tropes that she was trying to do. Mm-hmm. Even though I don't really particularly agree with them, but all sorts of missed opportunities to develop those characters, to have a little bit more of emotional engagement. And her learning or her becoming a Neanderthal or fitting into Neanderthal society or not fitting just didn't, she was brought up by them. So eventually she should have been able to be Neanderthal, right? Because that's the essence of humanity. You are who you're brought up with, no matter what your genetic background is, right?
Yeah, and I think her only really big issue besides the hunting, but once they saw in the books, once they saw how good she was at hunting, they allowed her to hunt. And then it was brood was the problem, and that's, a boy of just a little bit older age, so they were the only kids at that same age at the time growing up, and she was supposed to be the outsider but kept fitting in. I mean, that's a fairly normal thing to happen in people, and then most movies now they would end up falling in love and marrying and being sweethearts. But yeah, I think you're right in that.
The brood is too Neanderthals for that, right?
Yes. I mean, but he was the only real, if I remember in the books too, he was the one that didn't want her around. And I think everybody else would have, you're right, accepted her more easily after raising her, and wouldn't have been easy to send her away.
Especially since in just the last few years, we have so much DNA evidence from so many sites showing individuals with mixed Neanderthal and modern human ancestry only like a few generations ago. We have all these sites in Romania and where's the other one recently? Czech. And also Denisova Cave, where we have a first generation hybrid who had a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. Is that right?
I think that's the way it is.
So, I mean, this is obviously something that would have happened many, many times in actual prehistory, where you would have one, either probably not a mixed group of people, because especially in the Eastern European sites, it's usually an individual looks like they have one Neanderthal ancestor back like 4 or 6 generations. So it seems like you would have had, well, in this case, it would have been more Neanderthals fitting into modern human groups. I suppose they don't necessarily need to be integrating into the groups. They just need to be meeting up for a liaison at some point, I suppose. But we could probably remake this movie. Even 2015 for the remake is a long time ago, as with how fast this DNA evidence goes. So we could probably remake this movie now and have much more nuanced interpretations of the social relationships between modern humans and Neanderthals.
Yeah, that's true. When I first read this book in my undergrad, there was still an argument about whether Neanderthals and humans interbred, and a lot of people thought no, and arguments over whether some individuals were hybrids or not, and we didn't have the DNA data yet. And then now to watch it as an adult and know that we have the DNA, know all of that, like just the perception. So when you're first reading it, Dirk, her son, seems like, oh, wow, that's crazy. And now you're like, yeah, of course.
But you see, in the 80s, so this is very interesting in terms of the evolution of human evolution, right? Thinking, right? So first you had Neanderthals as possible ancestors, then you had Neanderthals not as ancestors because there were all these Neanderthals from the Near East. And so then there was this idea that Neanderthals came from the Near East where they were less developed. So modern humans came from Neanderthals, but from the Near Eastern Neanderthals, and then they moved to Europe and became classic Neanderthals. Then you had all sorts of different ideas then of, back in the 80s, then there was this, okay, so Neanderthals come from Western Europe. They meet modern humans in the Near East. They overlap with modern humans in the Near East. So all of this was happening. Lots of what we don't know about human evolution and what we thought we knew and what percolated in popular imagination was based on the bias of Neanderthals being so well researched in the West and practically unknown what's happening elsewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you had this complete disconnect between what we know now and how these ideas were developed at the time. And so modern humans, Neanderthals meeting and interbreeding was quite commonly perceived as possible and correct back in the late 70s and 80s. So you have Fred Smith and his work on modern humans, in which he actually demonstrated lots of Neanderthal traits, percolating into modern human populations, especially from Eastern Europe, right? So this is now being he's been like 40 years later, his proposals are vindicated after him being completely dismissed and this and that. So, yeah, science has its own way of slowly moving in different directions. And this is why it's important to have these areas which didn't have much fossils actually come back to bite them in the ass, so to speak. Sorry.
Are we out of things to talk about for this movie now?
I think so, yeah.
Which
I guess shows in itself that it was kind of a boring movie.
Yeah. I only had one page of notes, and for most of the other ones, we've got like 3 or 4. Just having a look through. So some other things that I've made notes on, which may be kind of prompts for a conversation, was they had tally sticks, which I thought was quite cool, because there's definite, there's material evidence, there's artifacts that are essentially tally sticks from around about the right time period, which are slightly mysterious.
We have a bare bone patella, which is incised from a Neanderthal context from Serbia. Yeah.
Yeah, very cool.
And there's sort of later ones that are probably like Homo sapiens, like modern humans, that seem to be like lunar calendars as well. Like,
yeah.
For which is pretty cool as well. So that was something that was a nice kind of touch that they had in there that was cool. And then also the Neanderthals are shown a couple of times using a bull roarer, which is that thing that he's kind of swinging round and round his head, which makes a kind of roaring sound. And I think there's also, I don't know what time period it's from, but there's definitely that's an instrument or a sound making instrument that goes way back into prehistory as a musical instrument that they found. I don't know whether they were made from bone or wood, but things that were probably that type of instrument. So that was another nice touch.
And they used them during the religious,
probably
things.
Yeah, probably.
So, well, in the movie, I mean.
Oh, in the movie, yeah.
When he was trying to,
and then also, I guess this is something for Josh and for Kim and for Mirjana as well. Not something that I know, but they showed the Neanderthals using thrusting weapons rather than, apart from the slingshots. All the spears they had were thrusting. They weren't throwing them when they were hunting the muskox and the bear. The muskox scene was really cool. How they managed to do that, I don't know, because muskoxes are huge and aggressive, and it looked like they were really there, kind of prodding it with sticks, and running through the trees,
having it chase them through the trees.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't mention at the beginning, but because the movie is old and it had a low budget, all the animals are real animals. And the scene where they're hunting the muskox, it really looks like they're just basically bullfighting a muskox. I'm worried about like the animal ethics, but the scene is pretty like some of the movies we're going to watch later, like Alpha. All the animals are CGI and they look so fake, but like the animal scenes, the hunting scenes look so good in this movie.
Yeah. I didn't notice, but I'm sure at the end it doesn't say, the Humane Society of America certifies that no animals were harmed in this picture because they just
didn't check.
No. Well, and also the humans, even it wouldn't pass health and safety protocols anymore.
True.
We're becoming
Here's
so
your
boring.
loincloth. Okay, now run.
And it's also, there is a little bit of confusion about seasons there and how things happen, because they some of them are fully clothed, some are in loincloths, some are like,
Ayla always has her long, beautiful legs exposed, even when she's bundled up in the rest of her,
Yeah.
There's one small little thing that I noticed when they first find the cave and they're exploring it, and he disturbs some bones and then scares a flock of pigeons, flies out of the cave, but it's making bat sounds. Were they trying to pass off a flock of pigeons as bats?
I don't know.
They're clearly pigeons.
But they're saying birds, and I thought, they behaved almost like bats, but I had no clue.
Yeah, no, I don't know.
Maybe those prehistoric birds were bat-like.
Yeah, some pterosaurs they disturbed.
Tell us, Ross.
Oh no, I agree. Yeah, they're definitely pigeons, but yeah, they sounded weird. I didn't think that they sounded super bat-like, but Yeah, pigeons don't tend to congregate in massive numbers in caves, as far as I know.
In caves, right? Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I'd be really surprised to have birds come at me instead of bats.
And then not to have them try and catch them. I mean, that was the other thing as well. Like, if all that
Yeah.
kind of free protein starts flying in your face, you're going to try and catch them.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, not get scared, right?
Much easier than a muskox.
But in terms of your question, Ross, going back to it, is yes, that is how we think Neanderthals hunted, that they were more close contact with large animals rather than using projectiles. Am I right?
Another nice touch. They never show. I mean, unlike some of the other films where they've clearly kind of shown lithics. I think it was interesting that I didn't see any lithics at all in this film. The spears they had weren't flint pointed. They were just wood hardened. I think in the fire, and the slingshots were just pebbles, like from a river. So yeah, no Mysterian blades or Acheulean blades or Oldovan blades or whatever that they would have tried to.
Which is disappointing. I have to tell you, that's disappointing. I mean, what can be prettier than a nice Mysterian blade? Actually, showing them tanning skins and doing stuff would have been quite easy,
Or even just having somebody doing some napping while they're around their hearth and stuff would have been,
You know what there was, though? There was a Mysterian bowl.
Was there?
Yeah.
It wasn't a stone bowl like in Encino Man. Mirjana and Encino Man, they find a Mysterian bowl. It was, remember when Isa gave her medicine bowl?
Oh, right, yes.
It looked like it was made of paper mache. I'm not sure. It didn't look so durable to be handed down.
Was it not a tortoise shell?
Tortoise shell, yeah. I thought that was, turtle or tortoise or something.
Mm-hmm.
So do we have any final thoughts on Clan of the Cave Bear?
Read the book.
Boring.
Feel free to skip the movie.
The books are better. Books are worth reading. The movie's not worth watching.
Yeah.
I think the kind of you can sum up the film with Ayla's a Leo, and she's basically her story is I am woman, hear me roar.
Yeah. And wherever I go, I don't fit because I'm a woman. Hear me roar.
Thanks to David Bach for designing our cover art. You can see more of his work at dkbach.com. Screens of the Stone Age is supported by the Palaeoanthropological Society of Canada. Find out what Canadian paleoanthropologists are working on at pasc-scpa.ca.